this video, we'll be exploring select statements within SQL. So by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to write basic select queries within the SQL language. I've pulled up here the sample database that we explored when I was introducing you to the idea of a relational database. Now, so you guys can play along with this and code along and complete some of the tasks I give you in this video, you'll want to also pull up the sample database. This is just W3 Schools SQL Try It database. So if you go ahead and Google search W3 Schools SQL Try, this should come right up. So I'll give you guys a second to pause and do that now. Once you have this pulled up, we can use the sandbox at the top of the editor to experiment with different queries we might write here. Now, we'll be focusing specifically on select statements in this video. In other words, we will be reading data from our database. But don't underestimate the complexity of selects. There's quite a lot we can do with just a select statement. And I would say the most sophisticated art of using the SQL language is understanding what you can do with a select, which it turns out is quite a lot. However, keep in mind that we can do other operations in our database. We'll be entering, modifying, and deleting data in a later module. But for today, let's focus on selecting. So I'm going to start with a basic select statement, which was pretty much already up there, but I'll write it my own way. You would read this as select all from customers. And when I run it, essentially the same thing will appear here, but we'll get a master list of every single customer stored in our database. So let's break down the SQL statement in detail. The first thing we do is select, which is a keyword in SQL. Select is telling the database that we want to read data. This next statement, the star, is read as all. This refers to which columns we'd like to see. So we're saying, please display every single column. Then we follow it with the SQL keyword from. And finally, we specify which table we would like to look at. So this is saying select all columns from the table customers. And we can even swap out different table names to see that this still works. I want to take a moment here to talk to you about some syntax stuff within SQL. So first of all, capitalization is pretty loose within SQL. So if I were to write select from products, all lowercase, it would work exactly the same. By convention, you'll typically see all SQL keywords capitalized. It's just a readability issue. It helps you see your keywords more clearly. So I like to do that. As far as the table names, you can capitalize them or not. It's going to read everything just the same. Another thing worth mentioning is new lines. Like most languages, SQL does not care about new lines, so this will run exactly the same. And once we get into slightly more complex queries, these new lines become quite important so that we don't have just one giant bit of SQL all on a single line. The final syntax tidbit I want to share with you is about the semicolon. Now, we're all used to JavaScript, in which the semicolon can occasionally throw things off, but let's admit it, for the most part, if you leave off a semicolon in JavaScript, you're going to be just fine. Now, one limitation to this Try It editor we're using is that it actually makes the semicolon optional. So within this particular sandbox, the semicolon is optional. But I actually think that's kind of a bad feature because it shouldn't fool you. SQL is pretty strict about semicolons. So if you were actually within the REPL for a database itself, or if you were writing raw SQL code within your code base to execute, you cannot leave off the semicolon. It's an important indication to the compiler that your code is done. So get in the habit of using the semicolon. It's a lot more strict in SQL than it is in, say, JavaScript. So that's the basic syntax gotchas within SQL. Capitalization is quite optional, though we like to capitalize these SQL keywords. The semicolon, however, not optional. So get in the habit of using it, even though in this particular sandbox, it won't complain too much if you leave it off. Well, let's talk about something a little more interesting that we can do with the select statement. I'm going to go back to our customers, if I can spell it, customers table. So I mentioned that this star here refers to the columns. It's saying select all columns. Well, as you might imagine, we can narrow down what columns we want to see if we'd like. So for example, if I only wanted to see my customer ID and my customer name, I could put those after the select statement instead of the all, just separating column names by commas. In this way, it will only display the column names that I've specifically selected. And as with everything else, capitalization is optional here. One other cool thing we can do is that if, for example, we wanted to see, let's start with this. If we wanted to see the city and country from customers, we could run this code. However, let's say we wanted to first see the city, then see the country, and then we wanted to see everything else in this table. We could put in the star. So what this is doing now is it's saying, let's start with the city, then the country, and then we'll follow with all remaining columns. So if we wanted to put a custom order for the columns in, we could list out all column names in whatever order we want. But sometimes we only care about putting a couple things at the front. So we can use this style of syntax to rearrange the order of the columns in which they're displayed. It's a tool that ends up being useful in quite a lot of cases, because we generally want whatever we care about the most to come at the start. The next thing I want to show you is a where statement. So what we've been working with here will limit which columns we see. We can limit which columns we see or possibly rearrange the order of columns as we see them, which is useful, but some of the most important things we do with these select statements have more to do with rows. This particular database has 91 records or 91 rows. That would be considered a very small database. Oftentimes we're working with thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of entries, and usually we're not interested in all of them. So this filtering feature in SQL can be done using a where statement. Where statements will allow us to narrow down what types of data we want to see. So let's go back to select all. And then let's narrow down what city we're interested in. So we're now saying, show me every column in the customers table, specifically where the city is equal to Berlin. We can see that there's only one entry in here where the city is Berlin. Let's try London instead. It's now displaying every single entry within this table where the city is London. In this case, there are 6 entries. Now, one note on capitalization once we get into where statements. We know it's optional with these keywords, it's optional with our table name, it's optional with our column name. However, you have to be careful when you're putting in a specific value. This is a string and it's looking exactly for something that matches this. So if I had lowercase London, there'd be no results. So that's one thing to be mindful of, is that while we don't care too much about capitalization with respect to keywords or table names, we do have to get pretty specific when we're searching, when we're trying to match a city or some other column to an entry in our database. Select statements are not just limited to equals. So let's take a look at this products table. Notice that there is a price column here, which is numerical. We could try and find products that say cost exactly $10, but more likely we're interested in seeing some sort of range of products. So let's take a look at this. Also, one note, we can put our tables within these brackets. That's another convention that is sometimes used to specify table names. I find it a little clunky, so I don't do it, but that's up to you. All right, let's narrow our price down. I only want to see prices that are less than 15. So in this way, I see all the entries where the price is less than 15. So within these where statements, we're not simply limited to matching things exactly. We can also use any of these comparisons. We can use less than, or equals to, greater than, to narrow down the entries as well. That's the gist of the where statement. Let me give you a couple problems for you to practice this on your own. So first, I'd like to view the contact name and address, let's say contact name, address, and city of all customers. So you guys can go ahead and pause the video and find the SQL query that will allow you to see the contact name, address, and city of all customers in the customer table. Now I have a second task for you, and this one's a little trickier. So feel free to skip it if you want, but you're welcome to try it if you want a little challenge. In this one, I want you to view the customer name of all customers from either France or Spain. Now, I haven't showed you exactly how to do something like this with a where statement, but if you did a Google search, I bet you could figure out how. So focus on this first one, but if you want a little challenge, go ahead and try out the second assignment. You guys can pause the video and try that out on your own time. The final thing I want to show you with where statements is order by. So we'll start out with a basic select statement. Now, price is often how we want to order things, so let's throw in an order by statement. Now we see that all these products are being ordered based on their price, from least to greatest. If we wanted to shift and see the most expensive, we could always throw in this descending keyword. So it's just DESC, short for descending. It now puts everything in the opposite order. We see the most expensive item first, and then everything goes down in reverse. There's also an ascending option, but since that's the default, we don't usually hard code that in, but that's valid SQL if you ever need it. Let me give you guys a chance to practice with this order by statement. So what I'd like you to do is write a query that allows you to view all customers from Mexico listed alphabetically by their address. So this is a little more complex because we're going to need a where statement and an order by. But once again, I think you guys can figure out how to do that, especially if you do a little Googling. But I bet by just tinkering around, you can figure this one out as well. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Now we've just scratched the surface on these SQL selects, but this should be enough to get you started. So go ahead and try this out, and then I'll see you in the next video.